How did you move from found objects to Scotch tape?
I guess I kind of found Scotch tape as an object. I mean, not to sound sly or anything, but it is a little bit like it's responding to a material.
So your found objects were as tedious and repetitive, to use your word tedious.
Well,
that's not my word. I find them fascinating.
Yeah, you know, like a found object to me is sometimes it's something that is like kind of diaristic to me, sort of, you know, like this is something that I've had a relationship with, or it's something that you kind of find on the ground, or it's something you find on a store shelf. You know, it's all sort of an object, and it's responding to that. And so the idea of doing Scotch tape came from, I think it was something as simple as I like the kind of opacity of it. I like this. I like that idea that when you look at the tape, you know, it's quite opaque, and it has this very nice. You can see through it for a little bit. It's kind of like looking down into the water, and you can see maybe like 3 feet down, but then you can sort of see things. And I like that about looking at in the Scotch tape. And then I was just coming up with. I was creating these little two-dimensional abstractions, just sort of based on this idea of the more I apply, the more I get contrast. And so it was a very kind of natural, you know, one day sort of playing in the studio with what I had, you know, and in some way that's why it was a bit of a found object. It was something that I had, and a lot of the times that's how I come up with ideas. It is quite literally like something just sitting on the tabletop, and I'm like, you know, I'm just going to play with this for a little while because I don't really have an idea in my head, and I have like 2.5 hours, so let's try to do something, and then it just starts growing from there. And then with Scotch tape specifically, I mean, just I guess because I work sort of three-dimensionally, quite naturally, I started saying, what can I do with this? Can I sort of actually form it into something? You know, can I actually create like a three-dimensional object with this like inherently very like flat, very like emotionally flat to me? It's like it's office supply equipment and stuff. Like, can I again coax something out of it? And then I just started taping things in the house. And then after I was thinking about it in that sort of Christo way, just like covering something. But then I thought, well, I bet you I can actually get it out and then have this skin. And I always think about them as like snake skins. You know, it's like this object that you know the original object is just kind of left, and this is what's been left over.
Ultimately, that's the goal. Ultimately, I would say it's right now. I think basically what happens right now is because this is something I can do, and I can do how I feel. If no one's kind of driving it, it can be. It's a way that I can explore things more. The architecture side of it, it's sad to say it's a bigger struggle with clients and things like that. There's a lot of things you have to kind of bend over and say, okay, well, all right, we'll let that go, and we'll get it. So ultimately, the goal would be, as any architect grows, when you're young, you have a lot of great ideas and stuff, but you don't have a lot of clients who are willing to kind of make those become reality. And so that's kind of the struggle you have, and it takes years and years as an architect, I think, to kind of get to that point. But painting itself becomes a way of kind of starting to kind of explore that opportunity. But what you're asking is exactly what would be the goal. To be able to do things in architecture that are more kind of sculptural in form and let it feed the painting and go back and forth. So
your paintings keep you sane while you stay.
You know, in some ways, you know, yeah, when you're saying a vacation kind of thing, the business of architecture is like anybody who runs a business. It's a lot of kind of stress and things. And so in some ways, although this can be stressful in terms of, you know, dealing with all these issues, for me it becomes a bit of a release just because of the mundane craziness of dealing with the business world sometimes. And that's part of the struggle I was talking about earlier, about when I was making these three-dimensional objects. The struggle I've found is that when I pull it out and it basically becomes a three-dimensional thing, but the way that I'm doing it right now, it's not flying. It's not. It fails in that part for some reason. Which is that, and so that's an interesting thing to me. So I don't know. So I'm working my way. I don't know. It's like kind of unrelated in a way, but years ago I studied with Daniel Davidson for a little while, and he was always this thing about You know, you could make something this big. If you have this much space, you can make this thing. And the problem with it is that so many people get these big spaces and they make these things, but it can be much more of a, I don't want to say interesting, intriguing, if you take a space like this and you get it all to get in there. Because there's this idea of density or something like that.
Even the idea of scale, which is very different than the idea of size.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's something that I've kind of like, as I realize that if I stay compressed on the wall and treat it that way right now, there's something that's happening there that's very interesting, I think, in terms of all three disciplines. But when you put it on the floor, you make a different piece of it, you lose one of the disciplines in some ways that I haven't been able to deal with yet. That's kind of what's struggling with that.
Well, part of it's being tethered, though, like that, you know, being tethered to a certain idea, or I mean, I was just thinking as you were talking about, you know, the sort of day-to-day kind of struggles that you have with, say, dealing with clients who say, I only want to spend this much, or I only want to clean this space, or something like that. Like that presents challenges that sometimes are very exciting. And
exactly. No,
really can let you flower.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, like I find when I have no deadlines, I don't have a show coming up, anything like that, you know, I'm sort of in an ocean. And sometimes I don't know which way to swim.
You gotta have
and it's nice to have that sort of tether of you know, this is kind of where I need to lead myself. That is something, you know, just small things like having a show coming up or something like that helps you focus on that. You know, or you know, you can, you know, we're going to give you a space, and the space is going to be like 7 inches by 28 feet. What do you want to do with it? And it's just like, ooh, that could be quite exciting. You know, that I never would have thought about had I not had a restriction like that put imposed on me.
Andrew Zeitfeld talks about her whole corpus of work being fine.
About just like I can only work in like 10 feet by 7 feet, and
I can have one string. I can have, you know, and
that I'm working on right now, particularly. I'm working on, well, right now my restrictions are sort of like logistical restrictions. I'm trying to create something based on the landscape piece, and I won the COLA fellowship for 2009, and so I have a space. Again, it's one of those things where, you know, it's an amazing opportunity to work in a large scale, and how can I work within a large scale that that's something like that. I'm sort of flipping between something like the landscape piece or the flower piece, where like how much scale actually enhances the work and how much will it detract? You know, because I have ideas on that piece of doing like this entire gallery floor would be an entire landscape. You know, where you know this entire square footage, maybe with a border around it so you can walk around. But would that actually make the piece better, or is the sort of, you know, the space that you give to the viewer's imagination to imagine it going on forever more important? So I'm sort of dealing with logistic, like sculptural problems right now, but it's based on that. It's based on scale right now, you know, and what I can do with it in relationship to working within a large space.
We know you're continuing to.
Well, yeah, I did some previous pieces to this series where I'm going to go back and investigate this work. Like all of these pieces are, it's basically, depending on, like there's some smaller ones in the back that are very, very thin. And again, this is something with the scale game. I have pieces in the back that are about that big, and then I have pieces here that are different sizes. I like to play the scales like that. And the other thing is that you have this distance. I did previous pieces where this got very large, but at the same time, it allows you to cut in and go inside. And so I'm working on some new ones that are going to kind of explore that some more. So you have the depth of what you build in terms of a canvas. It becomes kind of a new ground in a way.
So in both cases, you're working towards an expansion of the physical field of endeavor.
Mm. Yeah.
Which partly by manipulating scale, but especially by manipulating size.